They arrived in France not with rifles slung across their shoulders, but with paintbrushes, sketchbooks, and truckloads of rubber. Their mission was simple and perilous: to trick an army that had conquered half of Europe. And for nearly a year, they fought a silent war, one waged not with bullets, but with imagination. Dawn in Normandy brought the slow churn of engines, the rustle of canvas, and the murmured discipline of soldiers assembling for another day's deadly work. But in one remote field, miles from the front, an unusual column crept along the road. Flat-dead trucks carrying bundles of rubber tubing, air compressors, and wooden frames. The men who hopped down from the trucks were lean, energetic, and grinning, as if they were on their way to set up a carnival. They were members of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a unit so secret that its own allies barely knew it existed. On paper, they were engineers. In reality, they were America's ghost warriors, the Ghost Army, tasked with confusing, misleading, and deceiving the German High Command with the largest theatrical production Europe had ever seen. Their origin story began 2 years earlier, in 1943, in the quiet classrooms of an American art school. Military planners preparing for the Allied invasion of Europe had stumbled upon an unconventional idea. If the Germans relied heavily on aerial reconnaissance and radio interception, then perhaps a unit trained to generate false signals, fake armies, fake artillery, fake divisions, could manipulate German responses. A deception force crafted from the creative minds of artists, illustrators, designers, sound engineers, stage set builders, and radio operators. The U.S. Army reached out to some of America's finest art institutions, including the Cleveland School of Art and the Pratt Institute. It sounded absurd. Recruit artists to fight the Wehrmacht? But what better weapon against a mechanized enemy than illusion itself? One of the earliest recruits, young art student Bill Blass, would one day become a world-famous fashion designer. Another, Arthur Shilstone, dreamed of being an illustrator, not a combat veteran. Yet here they were, learning how to inflate rubber tanks in minutes, mimic battalion shatter over the airwaves, and stage entire divisions from nothing but canvas, plywood, and air. By the spring of 1944, they'd become masters at deception. Their 4 key tools were now polished and ready: visual deception, inflatable tanks, fake artillery, cardboard airplanes; audio deception, massive speakers blasting pre-recorded sounds of troops moving, tanks grinding, and engineers digging trenches; radio deception, operators mimicking entire networks of units that didn't exist; special effects, uniform swaps, altered insignia, fabricated supply dumps, and staged accidental sightings. Together, these elements formed a symphony of lies, powerful enough to bend the enemy's expectations. Their first major operations after D-Day unfolded in the hedgerows of Normandy. German aircraft scoured the countryside hunting for Allied concentrations. Every cluster of tanks risked drawing an attack that could upend the fragile beachhead. That was where the Ghost Army excelled. Under the cover of night, they would erect a phantom armored division, rubber tanks inflated into shape, their shadows cast carefully to mimic the real thing. In the moonlight, they looked formidable. From the air, they looked real. And when German reconnaissance reported the supposed presence of an armored division, Allied commanders took note with satisfaction. Every bomb dropped on a rubber tank was a bomb not falling on a real one. But their deceptions grew more daring as the Allies advanced eastward. In August 1944, during the breakout from Normandy, the Germans were desperately trying to predict the direction of Patton's Third Army. Patton's mobility was legendary. German generals feared him as the most aggressive commander on the Western Front. If they could guess where he would strike, they could fortify. If they were wrong, the consequences could be catastrophic. The Ghost Army made sure they were wrong. In a meadow near the French town of Saint-Lô, they staged a full phantom armored column, complete with camouflage nets, fuel drums, and tire tracks carved into the dirt by dragging weighted boots and shovels. They played hours of recordings, tanks rattling, bulldozers growling, men shouting commands. Their radio operators sent streams of encrypted messages in the patterns of the units they were impersonating. From miles away, German observers saw an armored giant forming in the valley, but it was all air and artistry. Meanwhile, Patton's real divisions were silently moving far to the south, preparing to slice across France with astonishing speed. The deception worked perfectly. German troops redeployed in the wrong sector, leaving their flanks exposed. Patton broke through, racing across France like a thunderbolt. But the Ghost Army's most dramatic mission was yet to come. By late 1944, the war had become unpredictable once again. The Allied front had stretched thin and tired. Winter crept across Europe, and the Germans, cornered but defiant, launched one final massive offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. In the Ardennes, under swirling snow, German armor punched deep into American lines. A stunned Allied command scrambled to stop the advance, reinforcing sectors that were collapsing under pressure. Amid this chaos, the Ghost Army faced its most dangerous assignment yet, an operation where failure meant annihilation. In March 1945, as the Allies prepared to cross the Rhine River, Hitler's last major natural barrier inside Germany, the stakes had never been higher. Commanders needed to mask the real crossing site at Remagen. To do so, the Ghost Army had to pretend that an entire U.S. infantry division, the 30th Infantry, was assembling miles to the north. The challenge was immense. Their deception had to fool not just German scouts, but German command, analyzing radio patterns, troop movements, and supply routes. For this mission, the Ghost Army used everything they had, every trick, every canvas patch, every whisper of illusion. Their inflatable motor pools lined a forest clearing. Rubber jeeps sat neatly in rows, each fitted with fake oil stains painted on the ground. Their engineers carved tire tracks in the mud, building the illusion of hundreds of vehicles constantly coming and going. At dusk, trucks rolled in carrying giant speakers, massive wooden boxes nearly the size of refrigerators. With careful choreography, crews played hour-long loops of the 30th Division's daily soundscape, clanking mess kits, shouted orders, engines rumbling, hammers striking steel. The recordings were so realistic that even American soldiers outside the operation zone thought a real division was present. But the most delicate piece was the radio deception. Operators trained to mimic not just the language of real divisions, but their quirks, how certain officers spoke, what slang they used, how often they transmitted. These men had to maintain fake conversations for hours, knowing the Germans were listening. They performed like actors in a theater, except their audience was armed, hostile, and deadly. The entire illusion held firm. German forces repositioned, expecting a major crossing in the north. And in that crucial window, the Allies made their real push across the Rhine, opening the door to Germany's heartland. The Ghost Army was elated, but their celebration was short-lived. Just days later, they were sent into another desperate deception. Near the German town of Hunse, the 30th and 79th Infantry Divisions were stretched dangerously thin. Their supply lines were strained, their numbers depleted, and German counterattacks threatened to exploit the weak point. To shore up the line, commanders ordered the Ghost Army to impersonate an entire armored division, the fearsome 2nd Armored, the Hell on Wheels Division. The Ghost Army moved into position under darkness, surrounded by the distant glow of artillery. They inflated tanks in the freezing night air, their breath forming clouds around them. Under the faint hum of compressors, they worked with frantic speed. If the Germans struck before their illusion was ready, the deception. By morning, an imposing force stretched across the fields. Rubber Shermans, wooden command posts, fake machine gun nests. Their radio traffic buzzed. Their sound engineers blasted tank movements through hidden speakers. But the enemy was close, so close that German patrols occasionally probed the perimeter, testing their lines. If a patrol got too close, they would discover the truth. These tanks could be punctured with a knife. It was one of the most nerve-wracking operations of the war. The Ghost Army kept up their act, even staging fake supply deliveries and sending patrols along visible roads. They sat in exposed areas, knowing a single German shell could obliterate their deception in seconds. It worked. The Germans hesitated, believing a powerful armored division had arrived. Their attack stalled. The real units held their position, and the front stabilized long enough for reinforcements to arrive. As spring advanced and Allied troops swept through Germany, the Ghost Army found themselves at last nearing the end of their strange and secret war. Their final operations involved feints to draw German attention away from main thrusts into Bavaria and toward the Alps. Even as the Third Reich collapsed, the illusions continued. Rubber tanks dotting meadows that would soon be peaceful again. Radio static filling airwaves that would soon fall silent. And then, one morning, rumors spread quickly. Germany had surrendered. The Ghost Army soldiers sat quietly, reflecting. Despite participating in more than 20 major deceptions, they had rarely fired their weapons. Yet they had saved tens of thousands of lives by preventing battles, misdirecting German divisions, and supporting some of the war's most vital operations. Their accomplishments were so sensitive, so valuable to future military deception strategies, that the entire project was classified for decades. Their work remained hidden, buried beneath layers of secrecy, until documents began to surface in the 1980s. Even then, many dismissed the stories as exaggerated. Inflatable tanks fooling Nazi commanders? It seemed impossible. But the evidence was overwhelming. Photographs emerged, art students grinning beside towering rubber artillery, jeeps made of canvas, decoy camps stretching across hillsides. Veterans stepped forward. Sketchbooks were found filled with wartime drawings, portraits, landscapes, and scenes of men inflating tanks that looked absurd and heroic all at once. Modern military analysts later confirmed what Allied commanders already knew. The Ghost Army had been essential to the success of the European campaign. Their illusions manipulated enemy decisions at critical junctures, saving lives by avoiding firefights that never needed to happen. The Germans respected the American deception craft deeply, sometimes interpreting these illusions as signs that US forces were more numerous than they were. And perhaps the most remarkable truth was this: not a single member of the Ghost Army was lost in action during their deception duties. Their tools were humble, their weapons were fabric and art, but their courage was unmistakable. The Ghost Army stands today as one of the most unusual and ingenious military units ever assembled. It represented a fusion of creativity and strategy, where modern art met ancient principles of deception. ideas echoing Sun Tzu's timeless lesson: all warfare is based on deception. Their success wasn't merely in the illusions they created, but in how they weaponized imagination. They understood the psychology of war, that commanders fear the unknown, that armies hesitate before shadows, that the appearance of strength can be as powerful as strength itself. In many ways, the Ghost Army anticipated the modern age of warfare, where disinformation, electronic signals, and psychological operations play roles as critical as tanks and soldiers. Their inflatable divisions were the ancestors of today's cyber-deceptive strategies, drone projections, and virtual battlefields. Yet their story also carries a more human meaning. These were young artists who should have been painting portraits, designing advertisements, or illustrating textbooks. Instead, they turned their crafts toward the grim necessities of war, choosing to save lives through deception rather than take lives through combat. Their contributions remind us that creativity, even in wartime, remains a profoundly powerful force. Their legacy stretches far beyond World War II. The Ghost Army inspired Cold War deception units, influenced NATO strategies, and built the foundation for modern psychological operations. But it also left behind something quieter: sketches, watercolor landscapes, notebooks filled with life on the front lines. These drawings capture moments of stillness amid chaos, humor amid danger, and humanity amid destruction. In the end, the Ghost Army's triumph was not measured in captured territory or enemy casualties, but in lives preserved and battles avoided. They fought a war of shadows and silhouettes, inflating hope where despair lingered, and crafting illusions that shaped the fate of nations. Long after the last inflatable tank was deflated and stored away, their story remained hidden, whispered only in private reunions and fading memories. But history, like art, has a way of revealing truth. And when the truth of the Ghost Army finally emerged, it shone like a spotlight across decades, illuminating the faces of young artists who once stood in muddy fields, turning rubber and sound into an army. They remind us that bravery takes many forms, and sometimes the most heroic battles are fought with nothing more than imagination. If you enjoyed this story of wartime illusion, join us next time as we uncover another forgotten chapter of World War II, where courage, ingenuity, and human creativity reshape the battlefield in ways the enemy never saw coming.